you, Mark. I would like to begin today by acknowledging the Wangal people, traditional custodians of the land on which I stand, as well as the traditional custodians of all the other lands from which we meet. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who may be with us here today. All right, before I introduce myself and this session, can I just remind everybody who is joining us to stay on mute? We'll remind you a couple of times just to make sure we all start off smoothly. Welcome to the second in the series of 10 Smart Places Masterclasses. Last week's session covered the topic building public trust and was really well attended, and I think our numbers are up again this week, which is fantastic. With another 8 topics yet to come, there's lots of great opportunities to expand your knowledge and your networks over the next couple of months. I'd like to extend sincere thanks to our host ACS and Mark Portlock for all of his hard work organising these sessions, and our speakers today for giving their time and sharing their knowledge with us all. Before I introduce them, just some basic housekeeping. Please do stay on mute for the duration of the presentations. We'll have a bit of time for Q&A after each presentation and then a fair bit of time at the end as well. So if you'd like to post your questions in the chat, we'll have Mark keeping an eye on those, and I'll invite you to come off mute, introduce yourself and ask your question when we get to those sections. This evening's event is being recorded. We'll let you know at the end of the session where you can access the recording as well as the slide decks that are used. Okay, so to introduce our 3 speakers today, we've got an awful lot of experience speaking to you from our 3 speakers. We've got Adam Beck, Jed Horner and Chris Boddy. So Adam is currently the Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council, Australia, New Zealand, and Secretariat for the Centre for Data Leadership. Adam is an urbanist who's worked for private sector consultancies and leading global non-government organisations to advance sustainable community outcomes for over 25 years. So decades of experience there that you're about to get insights from. Adam's the program lead for many of the Smart Cities Council's core initiatives. So that includes the Centre for Data Leadership, Future of Place and Code 13. Adam also curates the Australia-New Zealand Digital Twin Hub and Global Smart Cities Academy. There is much more detail on the website for Adam's bio, so I would encourage you to go and read that detail, just so that you're really across all of the experience that's being brought to the presentations today. Now, Dr. Jed Horner is the Head of Government Relations and Advocacy for Stone and Chalk Group, which incorporates AustCyber. Jed's focus is on policy settings for critical and emerging technologies that enable companies to scale sustainably and securely. Prior to this role, Jed was Strategic Advocacy Manager for Standards Australia, where he authored Australia's AI Standards Roadmap and drove work to ensure Australia's active participation in critical and emerging technologies. This includes through domestic and international partnerships. He's participated in international dialogues on behalf of Australia in all these areas. So we could not have a better speaker for today's topic. Jed previously worked for the New South Wales and New Zealand government and continues to serve as a non-executive director in the NGO sector. He holds qualifications in political studies and public health and is currently completing a graduate program in security and resilience with Northeastern University. And finally, Chris, I think I'm introducing you in the order that you're speaking, so hopefully this is logical. Chris also has over 25 years of experience in geospatial and imagery interoperability policy, management and standards. Prior to leaving the Australian Public Service, Chris worked in various Australian government agencies, including the Office of Spatial Policy. Chris currently chairs Standards Australia's Geographic Information and Geomatics Committee and is a member of other Standards Australia committees that require geospatial knowledge and understanding. Chris presently represents Australia on various international and ISO, that's the International Organisation for Standardisation, committees. These include ISO TC211, Geographic Information Geomatics Committee, ISO IEC JTC1, WG11, Smart City, as well as Sustainable Cities and Communities. I'm going to stop reading those codes out because I'm killing the vibe already. Chris is an Australian and ISO delegate to the UN Global Geospatial Information Management and honorary senior fellow of the Melbourne School of Engineering at the University of Melbourne, and is the Open Geospatial Consortium's contact manager for Australia and New Zealand. So as you can see, a huge amount and wide range of knowledge in the room, in our virtual room today. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first presenter, who I believe is Adam.
Kelly, thanks so much for that that very warm introduction, and to ACS for hosting this session. I would like to also start by acknowledging the First Nations people as the original inhabitants on the land of which I'm coming from today, which is in Brisbane, Queensland, and I recognise the country north and south of the Brisbane River as home of both the Turrbal and Jagera nations, and I pay deep respect to elders past, present and future. I will be kicking off today's masterclass with a bit of a whirlwind tour of everything sort of Smart City Standards 101. This is a 1 hour session that I've typically a 1 hour session that I've truncated down into about 15 minutes. So there's some gaps in here, but certainly for those that want to geek out on Smart City Standards, you can call me anytime. I would love nothing more than a conversation about that topic, which is dear to my heart. I'm going to touch on sort of an overview of the why standards. It's always a good starting point. Standards supporting smart places and smart cities, and just a final little sort of set of tips and hints around working with standards, which is certainly a bit of a segue into what Chris and Jed are also going to talk about. Starting off with the why, I like to break it down. I find that people are typically in two camps. They love standards or they hate standards. And a lot of those that don't like standards, they kind of, I think at times, don't really understand the beauty of them. And I like to start with avocado on toast. It's always a good starting point for many different things. And I love a good avocado on toast, but avocado on toast is avocado on toast. The introduction of things like tomatoes and eggs and various types of cheese kind of, you know, really muck around with that. So standards are really about ensuring that we get what we intend to get. And it's a very simplified version of how standards can really help us define what it is that we want to achieve. And for me, it's just plain up avocado on toast. Standards is a very deep and long and broad community and agenda and world of really just trying to do good. And standards are developed by all different types of organizations all over the world. We certainly have standard development organizations. Standards Australia, of course, is our local homegrown standards development body. But we also have NGOs. We also have private sector companies. We have standards that look like many different things. I worked in the green building industry for a number of years, and Green Star for buildings, a certification and rating scheme, is kind of a standard. It certainly defines what best practice looks like. It has a certification scheme around it, but it's voluntary. You know, you don't have to do it, and it was developed by industry and government by the Green Building Council of Australia. We then have those formal standards bodies scattered all over the world, from Britain to Australia to the US. And indeed, the Smart Cities Council in 2013 published the Smart Cities Readiness Guide, and we view that at times as a standard. It contains definitions and frameworks and other similar things. So first of all, standards can be developed by many different organizations in different countries, different topics. Not all standards are the same, which is a good thing. But one standard that is the same everywhere globally is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we are seeing more and more the International Standards Organization looking to embed our global goals throughout the standards making work that it does. And I think that's an excellent thing. And I really include this slide merely to prompt us yet again to really remember that as a nation, our national government has signed up to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a really nice and simple framework that allows us to start somewhere when we don't know where to start. They're globally endorsed, they can be localized and tailored, and I think they're sort of the most beautiful smart cities and smart places context we could ever sort of align with. And as I mentioned, you know, standards and ISO, standards development and ISO are certainly more and more aligning to those SDGs. You don't need to read what is on the slide here. This is a simple sort of extract from 37122, one of my favorite standards. And we're starting to see standards include references like this, where each of the SDGs are identified in terms of their alignment with various parts or components or contents within those formal standards. So it's becoming a lot easier for us as organizations to be able to demonstrate transparently that through the adoption and embracing standards, that we're also certainly advocating and making sure that there is action around the achievement of the global goals, which is a good thing. One of the things I like about standards, first and foremost, is that they help us define whatever it is that we want to define. And being in the smart cities kind of space, like I was prior to that in the sustainability space, I've been marred with a career where these concepts and terminology have been redefined over and over again. And my personal view is I think we lose ground when we get obsessed about redefining certain things when there are clear definitions that exist and have for quite some time. What you see on the screen here, Exhibit A, is PAS 180, published in 2014 by the British Standards Institution. So note the date there, 2014, and note what is contained within that document being a smart cities vocabulary. What is in that document is a definition of a smart city. Yet today, sort of 7 years later, you know, every 45 minutes I take a call or have a conversation where my peer or colleague or newfound sort of collaborator makes the comment, oh, you know, that smart cities thing, yeah, it means a million different things to a million different people. There's no real definition for it yet, is there? And it's sort of like, no, there is a definition. There has been for a long time from day one, and it's tech and data for good, or thereabouts. Most of them sort of say the same thing. So standards play this really absolute fundamental role in sort of generally getting us on the same page around some of these key concepts. And if we were to end there with standards, I think they have certainly done a fantastic job. But of course, as you'll see, we certainly have much more that standards offer us. But that is a really important fundamental starting point, and particularly for this business and this agenda that we're in with smart places and smart cities, we've got some pretty solid definitions that have been around for quite some time. So apologies for those that thought that the concept was still very elusive in terms of what it meant. It's always meant the same thing, and it always will, which is tech and data for good. This is one of my all-time favorites, and when you get to a place like me, you have favorites. ISO 37122. This did start as an international standard. When I say we, I mean Australia, the collective we, and Standards Australia adopted this standard last year. You can see the 2020 on the end of that standard there. This is a quite a substantial one. In fact, I have my 14 most favourite standards here with me, but 37122 is a fantastic standard when kind of you don't know where to start on smart places and smart cities. It's a set of indicators for smart cities. It's a beautiful set of metrics. There's around about 80 in there under 19 thematic areas. And I love it because if you don't know what level of performance you want to aim for or sort of hit, it doesn't matter. There's a metrics there that at least allows you to start measuring performance regardless of how far your performance is going. So it's a really beautiful starting point, and we encourage all cities, all organizations that are looking to really drive outcomes through technology and data to use 37122 as one of the starting points. Now, I said to myself, I wouldn't take us down a rabbit hole into individual standards because we may never stop, but 37122 is one of my all-time favorites. So I've sort of highlighted some of the why and some of the benefits of standards, but I want to go a little bit more broader, because some of these clear benefits are absolutely fundamental to our productivity and prosperity as a nation, how we interact internationally. And Jed and Chris will also pick up on some of these points. Shared purpose, I've kind of, touched on that, clear definition, getting us on the same page. We're trying to achieve something. We have this shared purpose, common understanding. When it comes to procurement, standards can be absolutely gold for hopefully obvious reasons. System integration is a really important one. And things like security, supporting investment, whole efforts by nations to create standards in some sectors and in some places are really fundamental around exporting talent, trade, and boosting economic opportunity. So, sometimes when you're in sort of neck deep, around the table trying to, redefine procurement requirements, remember that this is part of a really bigger, important picture for our nation. And as much as they can be frustrating, standards are just underpinning to our prosperity as a nation. So going a little bit deeper into smart cities and smart places, I'm going to do a very sort of really just rapid representation, hopefully to give you the confidence that there's kind of a standard for anything and everything, and they're all good. So let me start with this one. This is sort of a bit of a heat map we created a couple of years ago. We were trying to demonstrate for the built environment, for smart cities, for IoT and building information modeling, that there's good support around in the form of standards. And as you can see here, there is no shortage of guidance and support. And in our field, where every day, there's a lot of concern around privacy, cybersecurity. How do we ensure that we're going to manage this risk and that risk? One of the first fundamental things we can do is go and have a look at what standards exist. I find that there is more and more the instance where we find ourselves in unfortunate circumstances that we haven't been able to sort of manage or communicate something, yet behind it there's a standard that if we read it, if we knew it existed, provided really good guidance. So standards, are a very important enabler for us as policymakers and practitioners to do our jobs to the best of our ability. The other thing I would like to highlight on this slide is the strategic, process and technical standards. So we have strategic standards that help define concepts and vocabulary and terminology, how to create a smart places strategy. We have standards for those. Then you've got process standards. How do you run an event in a sustainable way? How do you ensure that as an organization you're embedding environmental practices? So a whole range of process level standards. Getting down to that technical level of standards, that's where we get into real deep things. You can't necessarily read what's up here on the screen, but cybersecurity for certain devices, information and data quality, a lot of building information modeling, IoT standards. We are flush with standards that really help those kind of sectors and practices within our built environment. This is a bit of a built environment focused one. I can only imagine, what we would find if we did a transportation related one, so on and so forth. These are sort of just images more than anything to represent what I've just said, going from the most highest strategic to the most detailed. So you've got, for example, 37106, which helps shape your strategy development process, all the way down to 30161 that allows you to really define the architecture for an IoT data exchange platform. that spectrum of detail is really important, and knowing that we've got standards all across up and down that spectrum is quite important. So just finally, let me touch on some of these core enablers. These are the 7 core enablers for smart cities that we use globally at the Smart Cities Council. I'm not going to read them to you. They're up on the slide there. They're sort of high-level thematic area enablers. And of course, as one would expect, standards aligning to all those enablers. 22417 giving us Internet of Things use cases, and those sensors and data collectors really being a fundamental bedrock for the smart city. We've got communication and connectivity networks. We've got standards that go into areas as deep as how do you measure the electromagnetic human exposure of certain telecommunications network. 62209 gives you that guidance. We all talk about interoperability. We all talk about that it's a fundamental barrier if we don't get it right. Well, guess what? We have an Australian standard for IoT interoperability, built here, homegrown with our great IoT talent that we have across the nation. So 21823 is a great guiding document to start with. Privacy and security, but privacy becoming more and more of a concern. You know what? We have privacy and smart cities standards out of BSI originally, 27570. A great document, an easy read. This is really good stuff that we all have available at our fingertips right now. When it comes to data management as one of our core smart city enablers, 3161 data exchange platforms, as I mentioned earlier, a great standard. And mucking around in the field that Chris and the geospatial community have when it comes to computing resources, central GIS systems, 19144 around GIS classifications. You kind of name it, and there's a standard there to give you fantastic guidance. And probably one of my favorites with the last enabler around analytics being the super enabler of the smart city as we define it. Here is some work from JTC 1 SC41 Working Group 6 on digital twin, and Standards Australia has a digital twin working group. We're feeding up into the work. This little image here, deliberately small. I don't want you to read it. Not that I'm trying to hide anything, but this is the in the weeds, the late night, midnight teleconferences that are happening around the world as the ISO community track change document after document to try and get a consensus-based approach to defining, in this instance, what digital twin is. That real early sort of important terminology, definitions, use cases kind of work. And so more to come in the digital twin field on standards for those that are keen. Working with standards, my last slide, because I know Jed, in particular Chris, will touch on this. Standards are a core enabler for good. They're there to help, get to know them, educate yourself. Priority number one. Number two, bring them into a conversation, whether it's a dialogue, whether it's a procurement, whether you want to build greater transparency, start weaving them into your conversations in the work that you're doing. Finally, think big and start small. Find a standard that aligns with your goals, a particular project or a program. Start there. You don't need to conquer the world, boil the ocean with standards. As I said, 37122, maybe that's an awesome starting point because it's got 80 indicators in it. It could bring your whole organization together. Consider it sort of, the kitchen table where you can have great conversations as an organization. But Kelly, that's it from me for now. I hope that was beneficial.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam, for making the importance of standards so clear. It seems like such a no-brainer when there are standards directly supporting globally recognised sustainable development goals. These are international standards that have already been adopted in Australia, so that gives us a real licence to get on and start using them. I should have introduced myself better earlier. I'm here from the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment with the Smart Places team. So I might just kick off some questions while we give people a chance to write a few up. We've got some funding available for a Smart Places acceleration program. And one of the criteria that we've set up is interoperability. Now, standards or following standards or addressing standards seem like a really obvious way to deliver that interoperability. where would you recommend that anyone looking at funding from that program start in getting to know these standards?
Well, a couple of things, Kelly. Knowing generally the approach and the culture of the Smart Places team at DPI, they're open for a conversation about anything, anytime. I would think that if I was an organisation seeking funding from the New South Wales government or a recipient of it, I'd want to be demonstrating best practice. I'd want to be demonstrating best practice not only to DPI and the New South Wales government, but also to my community. So standards are a great way to be transparent as well. And I think the co-creation process that Simon Hunter talks about all the time, this could be a really great set of funded projects that allow us to collectively see which standards work really well. We've got a lot of standards there, right? I touched on a lot of them, rattled off heaps of numbers, but a lot of them are still not necessarily road tested. I would be encouraging all of us, if we're participating in that program and seeking funding, that every single applicant bring a standards conversation to the collective table, and we all learn from that. Because only then are we going to grow. We'll know which standards are good. Standards are continually evolving as well. As Chris will highlight, they're always there for improvement, amendments, making sure they work for us. So I would hope that we're really encouraging a conversation around standards in any application that comes in.
Thanks so much, Adam. I haven't seen any questions coming in just yet. So just if anybody does have anything they'd like to ask Adam, feel free to pop that in the chat right now, and we'll get you to take your microphone off mute. Just to keep that rolling, you mentioned when we were chatting earlier this week that you worked on the Green Star system and were part of setting that up. So that's a completely voluntary standard, and yet its uptake is huge. What do you think would improve the uptake of Smart Places related standards so we can get onto that path towards consistency?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the Green Building Council, I mean, they've been around for 20 years now and really focused on one standard. So they've got a bit of an easier job than Standards Australia that have a full library. But in saying that, really building an army of champions that really advocate for standards. And, with the Standards Australia Smart Cities sort of committee now up and running, there's a Smart Cities standards roadmap at Standards Australia. I think we've got the foundations in place to really grow the group of champions that will advocate for standards. I certainly in the last 12, 18 months have just, observed on the sideline that we're talking about smart city standards more and more. And as the peak bodies as well, it's not all up to Standards Australia to do this. They need everyone to pitch in. So the Internet of Things Alliance, the Smart Cities Council, and others really need to the standards are there now. We need to do our job and pick them up, continue to advocate for them, build capacity. And the Green Building Council of Australia have had 20 years to do that. They've had good funding and an army of champions. So it's not a magical formula. We just need to, as I say, learn to love standards, and that's more of a cultural thing than anything. So if I can rub off a bit of my enthusiasm to others, hopefully, we'll continue to grow the community.
Well, hopefully we've got a virtual room full of future champions, and we're here at the start of that 20-year process. We've got Simon Hunter in the chat that's just echoing that question. What best can everyone in this masterclass do? Who should bring together the Champions Network? Did you want to say anything more about that, Adam, or do you feel like you've already addressed it?
Who should bring together the Champions Network? Well, I think DPI is playing a fundamental role in doing what it's doing by catalysing, interest through the fund. We just need to be diligent now in asking the questions about standard. And there's no crime. No one gets hurt if we ask, hey, what standards are you kind of considering or aligning with? And I think Simon and the team are primed. I think those that are helping promote the system, the advisory board, and the more we do, these type of things, I think that sort of network will grow. We've all got our own channels to communicate. Whether it's LinkedIn or others. We should all commit to spending some time to hang around standards a bit more and talk about them and share them. Simple things like that.
All right. Look, I might just take this opportunity to invite Simon to come off mute if there was anything else you wanted to ask or add, Simon.
I think Adam's answers and humbling references were great, so I'll shut up now.
All right. No further questions that I can see, so we'll move on to Jed. Jed, are you up next?
I am indeed, and thanks so much, Kelly. And it's great to follow people like Adam and indeed have Chris follow me, people I've worked with for a number of years, and obviously bring that experience in championing standards too. I'm just going to share my screen as I speak with you on our typical COVID throwback to 2020. Here we go. And you should have that visible now. Fantastic. And there we go. So I wanted to pick up where Adam actually left off, which I think was a really, really good start to the deep dive as to where are we using standards, how are we using those, and why do they matter? When I joined Standards Australia at first, like many of you who are joining this masterclass, you've heard the buzzwords around interoperability, you've heard the phrases around safety and security, they're all good. But what you need to do, obviously, and what we all want to understand as human beings is beneath that, how does that actually manifest in everyday life? One of the examples I liked to use, and I was helped by the announcement at the time that Sydney was going contactless in terms of pay as well, is how standards are actually instrumental in so many things we do in our daily lives. Adam touched on that really well, but thinking through simple transactions and simple things we do every day. So topping up our Opal card, the back room there's a standards interface in terms of how money transfer is taking place. And then when you have tourists with you, I know this is a throwback to pre-COVID, thinking through moving through those gates in Sydney as well, an example of how standards are working every day, but you don't think about it. So the card on your screen in front of you is an example of a standardized format. More ways to pay, that whole layout is actually an ISO standard. And as that goes digital, the same thing applies. And then, as I said, in the back room, what's happening in terms of interoperability for the engineers, for the payments nerds, the people who love to get amongst this stuff, that's where payments are playing a critical role as well, and obviously driven by standards. And without those standards, we would find it very hard to take your Visa card or your MasterCard from here to London or vice versa and actually get around the city. So it's not just smart places, but simple things like mobility where standards play a critical role. It's the physical and it's the digital. It's the often unsung stuff that I think makes it real for all of us. And I'll move on in just a second to talk through how we actually build those standards. So Adam alluded to this. We have national standards bodies in each country. The British have the BSI, British Standards Institution. Australia has Standards Australia. So all those standards start with an idea from people like yourselves on this call who might be technical experts, or you might be people sitting in government who are working in a really interesting, challenging problem area, and you want to fix that issue. That's what's happened in construction historically in Australia. So having disparate regulation, where we went from things like having disparate rail gauges, still an issue, to more harmonised ways of actually building things physically. And that's how we got to the National Construction Code and the standards we use there to actually build physical things that we see in our cities as well. So the standards process, as I said, is driven by a whole range of interests. It's not just corporates, it's not just governments, it's people like yourselves who might have a technical solution to a problem. And as I said before with the payments one, and that was an example of banks and credit card providers getting together, and governments using it, certainly. The other analogies exist in smart places too. And that's exactly how we've got into the position we have with the smart places standards that Adam referenced and the slide he put up breaking those all down. So the process of drafting a standard, and I did want to walk through this, it's good for people to understand what's the difference between an Australian and an international standard. The short answer is they're often one and the same. An international standard can be adopted in Australia, which is basically a tick of approval from a bunch of Australians. That's good for use in this context. That obviously matters more in areas of life and limb, and I mentioned building before, where we've got unique conditions and threats. but it also matters in areas of IT. So Adam was talking about the Internet of Things, a slew of standards adopted there. They're adopted as international standards in Australia, and they gain the designation of Australian International Standards. So I just wanted people to be very clear and not to be confused about those two designations. They can work hand in hand, or they can be very similar documents that are adopted with a unique Australian tick. The other option, of course, is that we do stuff purely locally. So a great bunch of people might get together, propose a standard, and there's a process for that that Standards Australia talks about on their website. Quite easy to find that, and quite easy to find the Word document around that. And that's where you get together with like-minded people and you might draft a standard that works for your needs. It could be in any area. As Adam said, it could be strategic. You might want to talk about a process. How do you assess things? How do you prioritize things? Looking at metrics. You might want to dive right into the detail, and you might think you've got a really groundbreaking technology you want to work on too. And that's the other approach. Of course, what we often do in Australia and New Zealand and other like-minded countries, the UK certainly, is draft standards, get experts together, get them up and running. So they're published as documents. They get used by industry, hopefully, and largely. And then we take them globally. So that's an example of an export, really, that Adam spoke about, where we're taking something that has really worked and we're making that global. So best practice that might work in Australia, and we're taking that to the international market. I'm going to talk through some of those real examples now, and some of them are even more real given how in play they are around critical areas of government policy too. Of course, the whole process relies on crowdsourcing. So if you look at examples that Standards Australia is engaged in, people like Chris, people like Adam are engaged in, and many of you on the call, it's really getting the best brains together. And those are brains, people who might have legal backgrounds. They are used to looking at contracts, which I know many of you will be interested in from the backgrounds you come from, technical specifications, and of course, people like engineers and real specialists in those areas, and who get together in a really unique process, which removes some of those tensions that we usually have in the corporate world, or indeed between government and corporates, which you see often, speaking very frankly. And of course, the other thing about standards and the beauty of them, to use Adam's words, is that they're built for entities of all sizes. So a lot of smaller companies, a lot of smaller entities, and you know, if you think about local governments as well, might be somewhat intimidated by the idea that these standards are huge documents built for the Microsofts, the Googles, the Amazons. They absolutely are, but they're also built for smaller companies. Every standard is built to scale, and it's built to accommodate everything from an SME, a small business, right through to a large multinational business. So if you think about standards and privacy that are being developed globally at the moment, Microsoft has absolutely come out and said we are going to use those standards that we've helped to build globally to make our software, to make our offerings compliant with European privacy regulations, and we'll do that everywhere. And then, of course, we'll meet the local regulations too, but we'll do that through a standards approach. And what that means is that smaller companies can do exactly the same. It's not a question of size when it comes to standards. The other thing about the standards process is it's also about balance. You would not want to see people writing standards who have no skin in the game. And that is a real concern. So if you think about areas like IT, one of the things I used to do at Standards Australia, and many people on the call will know, is engage with the major players in this space. So when it comes to issues like cloud computing, I want to deal with 97% of the market that supplies government and that supplies the private sector, rather than have a committee developing standards that might represent the 3% of the market, because that would obviously be a real issue for Australia, for companies, and certainly for government, because arguably we'll be producing documents that don't have much use value. That's the other part of it. It's open, consensus-based, and it's balanced. In terms of actual examples, because this is the stuff that excites me like it will most of you, and actually is the beauty of standards when you see them go places from humble beginnings. There's a few examples. I'll start with the one down the bottom, and I hate to speak in numbers. I've now moved out of that world, but I'm going to keep doing it in moderation. You don't have to scribble notes. We're sharing these slides after the session, you'll be pleased to know. Risk management is one classic example. Started as an approach in Australia and New Zealand. So Kiwis and Australians got together and essentially built a framework where you do risk assessment through a stage approach. Many of you on this session will do that in your day jobs, whether it's embedded in contracts or whether you're thinking about frameworks for new technologies you're rolling out. And it's important to note that that particular ISO standard, the international standard, came out of a joint Australia-New Zealand standards written at Standards Australia. So that's an example, as I mentioned, of standards working and going global. The other thing about that particular standard is I spent the last 9 months before I moved out of Standards Australia pushing the value of that around government reforms. So Australia's critical infrastructure reforms, which might impact particularly people in the energy space, people in local government areas. That standard now, at least if you listen to the public commentary from the ACSC, is going to underpin some of those government reforms. So if we do standards really well and the private sector uses them and they go global, what you find is that they often ricochet back into government policy and regulation, because it's a lot easier to use standards that everyone knows and people are trained in than it is to start from scratch, to Adam's point before, where we reinvent the wheel about processes, where we reinvent the wheel about technology. Not a good idea, a waste of time, and we've got examples of how that works. The other one, and Adam spoke to this example about the Brits leading on things, a very good thing, is information security. So a standard there, which is ISO IEC 27001, initially came out of BSI in the UK, the British standards body, as a British standard. And then in the late 1990s and early 2000s, they gifted it to the rest of the world. And that found its way into government policy directives, so at state levels. If you looked at New South Wales, at WA, and even federally, and it was scaffolded off in terms of how governments did their policy around information security. And that's still the case today. It's still a baseline. The other thing about the standard and the beauty of it is that it gives you scale. So if you're a company that's using the standard, it's easier to enter international markets, and it's easier to start proving to government partners too that you're actually doing some baseline things around information security. So another good example of a practical standard which people use, it's certification based. So you get the certificate to say you've done the things you promised you would do. And you can give that to a partner, a client, a government agency to actually show that you've done something. Everyone can claim to be secure, everyone can claim to care, but how do you demonstrate that? And this is one route. And again, referenced in commercial contracts heavily. In fact, some multinationals push this standard as a way to make sure that everyone in their supply chain does some basic things around cybersecurity. And then, of course, payments messaging. So the example I started with, another one, a key driver. How would you have a smart city without the payments architecture in place? It will be impossible to imagine. It's often the last thing people think about. But for all of us, when we're talking about tap and go and having our cards on our phones and the like, absolutely fundamental to doing anything, whether it's a public service or a private service. So we can absolutely build standards, and we do, and we can scale them, and we can maximize the use. And I should also say the example about payments when it comes to this space, that's being adopted globally everywhere, including in Australia. So that's when you really get the good news story about standards taking hold globally and not staying in a silo. And of course, scaling. So as I mentioned before, we can do things. Australians can, and we have done things in the past about taking a global leadership role. We did it in risk management. We've done it certainly in partnership on things like AI. So the AI roadmap we spoke about is a great example I'll dive into very quickly, which is a new area. It's a new area in smart cities in terms of the standards space. It's a new area for governments to tackle. And that was a piece actually commissioned by the federal government. They wanted to understand, how does Australia play in that space? And we gave them some really practical answers. We said you should work with Canada, who started drafting a standard on AI, a standard that companies of any size can use, basically as a checklist, if I can put it in very blunt terms, to say, is our council, is our bank, is our shop ready to adopt AI? And that standard's being written right now by Australians in collaboration with people from Canada, the US, the UK, etc. And that's a success story of where we don't necessarily lead on stuff, but we lean in. And the stuff we get from that, we can use in our own market. So in a few years' time, when that's ready, expect to see that crop up in the smart cities space, because it will absolutely be relevant to things governments are doing, to things private companies are doing, to things local governments are doing themselves at all levels. And then, of course, in blockchain, we took a leadership role too. So that was really an area where no one was doing the work, and we kicked that off as Australia. And that's humming along nicely. There's a few standards that have already been published, like the AI example. So there's already a few standards in the stable, if you will, and there's more work to be done. But it's leveraging Australian expertise. So we're not sitting on the sidelines, and we're not just passive users. And that's something we certainly have to overcome in these spaces is actually being active participants and not spectators when it comes to standards, because we already have that issue in terms of technology adoption. So we want to be there front and center. And I think that's the success story that hopefully gives people the fire in your belly. It's certainly inspired me. And if you're actually paying attention today, on the margins, Maurice Payne has just launched Australia's international engagement strategy. It's on the DFAT website, but it's the cyber and critical technology engagement strategy. It has a whole 3 pages dedicated to standards, which I may or may not have had a role in helping to shape. And that actually talks about how Australia is going to lean in internationally and in our region to shape standards for tech. So it's now officially part of Australia's foreign policy platform. Of course, the great work that DPI is doing at a state level is putting that front and centre here in New South Wales, which is a leader, as we know. And then, of course, there's other work happening within the market where market actors, as Adam alluded to, are doing this stuff themselves. And we want to see that. We want to see everyone engaged and using those standards for maximum benefit. Of course, how do you do that? So the embedding part, we've spoken about the building, how you drive it, who's involved, all the stuff that gets involved in sausage making, so to speak. We've spoken about the scaling and what can happen when standards are adopted at scale. And now to talk about embedding, how do you do that in your day jobs? Because I know many of you on this call will be sitting there going, this is all interesting stuff. I want to dive into the map that Adam provided. I'm waiting for Chris to dive into even more detail about what happens globally too, and what's come out of that geospatial area in particular. But there's the question of how do you embed these standards? It's a question I used to get asked a lot. It's a question that's already come up in terms of who are those champions, which is what Simon and Adam certainly spoke to. And I suppose the clearest ways to do this is through commercial contracts or agreements. So as a contracting entity, whether you're a state government, a local government, you're a private company, you always have the power to, of course, include specifications in contracts, often done in schedules, and that gets really interesting and in the weeds for a lot of people. You might enjoy it on this call. And that's one way in which you can actually embed standards. So beyond talking about them and championing them, which of course is important, that's one way we see standards get brought to life. As I said, multinationals already do that. If they're carrying the can and the risk, they will often pass standards down through a commercial contract to say, if you want to be a partner for us in the APAC region or in Australia, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and you need to spend some time and money, bringing yourself up to scratch if you're not there, or retrofitting in order to enter the supply chain. It's common, you all know that, but it's just worth calling up again. Of course, the procurement process is another interesting space, and that again can happen in the public or private sectors, and that's either prescriptive approaches, we've seen them in the past. They can be really helpful in some cases where you've got widely used standards and you can see the people in the industry who are leaders and those who are more leaners, to use that phraseology. But I think you can also use other approaches. So asking people to nominate the standards they're using, asking them to think through standards rather than prescribing which ones can be really good. And the benefit, of course, to local councils in particular, but also to government and the private sector, is when you do that, you might actually find other standards that work really well, that are industry leading, that you hadn't thought about. We're all human beings. We've only got so much bandwidth. And often we've only got so much time to look through an Excel spreadsheet or a Word doc. And an alternative is to leave it open-ended, but to insist people use standards in some way, or at least talk through how they use standards. And of course, in terms of embedding stuff, we want to see the end product. Show me the standard. We want to see the built product. We want to see the digital product that actually gets shaped by those standards. And there's tons of examples of those. We walk past them every day. If you think about the city, as I said, you'll often see, if you've been in the standards world, a hell of a lot of manholes. You'll see, the built environment. You'll see windows all bearing the mark of Australian standards or international standards. And then in the digital space, you'll see the same thing. So you'll see those standards either stamped. If you go onto the websites of even multinationals like Google and AWS and Microsoft, you'll see detailed pages about how their cloud offerings meet the standards, and some of which I've mentioned. And so that's the other thing, is seeing how these standards are embedded. Often it's there in plain sight, but I know for people that are coming into this standards realm from outside, it's always good as a pointer to see where those things are hidden and to see the final product. On that note, and I know we've been pretty good with time, I'll leave it there for any questions people might have on that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jed. You really walked through some excellent examples. We clearly rely on standards every day. And as our cities get smarter, I think we'd all like to know that we can work just as seamlessly as paying for a coffee or a train trip. I have to say, as a new mum looking for any excuse to carry less stuff over the last year, I've been adopting the whole phone as wallet thing a lot faster than I expected. So thanks to standards for that, I guess. We did have a question in the chat there from Tom Worthington. Tom, did you want to jump in and put your question? You still with us, Tom? You might need to take yourself off mute. Yep.
You've got me?
Excellent.
I think I'm on twice, once on the computer and once on the phone.
Well done.
I was just wondering if there are any standards relating to energy reduction, pollution for cities, smart cities. I've got a student at ANU doing a project on the vague topic of how to use ICT to reduce pollution in cities. And I'm wondering maybe there'd be some standards to help.
That's a very good question, and I think I'll preface that by saying, as Adam mentioned, when you have a catalogue of thousands of standards, it's an interesting thing trying to be across all of those. I'm happy to provide for everyone in this session actually a list of those standards globally, so the international ones and also domestic standards. So I know in Australia we've tended to focus on the kind of climate change adaptation space. That's where we've got standards, but particularly around emissions in the cities space, for obvious reasons, as many people on the call will understand, it's been something less touched by governments and obviously by standards bodies. But I know that globally that's in play. So I'm happy to share with the slide pack that goes out live links to some of those, because that's a great question. Thank you.
And thank you. I think we're at the forefront here in Canberra, because I've just proposed we have electric utes to save the grid. I'll send a link on that. Thank you.
That's great. And I think, Kelly, just to add to that, that's another example of where Australians can lead. So when people are at the forefront, my kind of pitch there, noting I no longer work for Standards Australia, but I still obviously deeply care about what we do as Australians, like all of you on the call. That's a space where, we can lead. And I think certainly offline, let's talk about that.
Okay, I haven't seen any other questions come in. If anybody does have questions for Jed at the moment, feel free to type them up. I've got one here to kill a bit of time. Jed, we've talked a little bit about road testing, picking some of these standards up and running with them, just getting started. If people are finding the standards aren't working for them as they get road tested, what happens then? Who do they contact? How does that work?
Great question. We always revise standards. It's one of the reasons government even likes standards, because if you talk about how long it takes to change legislation, standards are often faster, as everyone on the call would know from that environment. So the process of revising standards is actually pretty straightforward. There's a form as well on the Standards Australia website, which looks very similar to proposing a new standard. And you can simply, as a member of the public or an expert in a space or anyone representing an agency, propose a revision to that standard. It happens. I'll give you a real example in the mining industry. We've got some great Australian innovation that's happening now, where people are building entire systems and architectures and doing things that are really innovative. And we need to change some of the IEC standards in that space that have to date dominated. And so what they're doing is actually rewriting some of that. And that will become an international standard. So it's a simple process of putting that to paper, demonstrating you have support from enough stakeholders, as I mentioned, and you can change those standards. The other thing you can do, I suppose, in real time, and this is more for the DPI team and people you're collaborating with, is also do it through the kind of open sandbox environment where it's de-risked for people. But we might want to walk through what's in a standard, what are the particular pain points, and bring people in to actually say, this is how you can solve that particular issue. There are issues sometimes with the application of standards, and that's something you can address by talking to people who know what they're talking about. And, that includes the Adam Becks and certainly the Chris Bodies on this call, as well as many people in government who have exposure.
All right, we do have a question here from Georgia Higgins about Australia versus global standards. Georgia, would you like to just pop yourself off mute and ask that one?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. What really I found interesting with what you were saying, Jed, is about, having the global standards, and obviously they're revised constantly. Often the Australian standard surpasses the global standard. My background experience is in electrical manufacturing, and often you would have competing standards going on, and Australia would end up at the forefront, but between revisions you would have other standards globally coming forward. How do you know between revisions? This content matter here is obviously being revised quite a lot with the fast-paced movement of the industry, but how do you know when the Australian standard is better than and best practice for the global standard?
That's a great question, and particularly the angle you had on the chat around startups too. I think if you look at the date, the designation, so all of the standards that are adopted, and Adam read out a whole heap of them. Often, what will happen is they're ISO, IEC, let's say 31,000, and then they'll have a date behind them, like 2018, for example. And that lets you know when that standard was adopted or developed internationally. And we do the same when we adopt it in Australia. So the assumption is that Australian expertise and the people who bring the revision or the request to adopt the standard in Australia will make sure that it's current when it's adopted. So we can do it through a modification where we change some of the contents of the standard. So Georgia, to your point, if it's really lagging, the global one, what we can do before it becomes an Australian standard is change some of that text. And that does happen, admittedly more rarely than just adopting it straight out. But that's really the pathway through which that happens. But I also tend to read market behavior. So in terms of the best standards or the standards that are being adopted, that's what I found to be a really effective means, particularly multinationals and supply chains, because that's when you're talking scale. And you understand that well, but you can understand when particular new standards are coming out and they're being adopted by the Siemens or the Microsofts or whatever, and you're thinking as an Australian company, how do I get into the supply chain, or how do I claim I'm doing, just as good or even better, service delivery or products, etc. That's another way to read the tea leaves, or so to speak, that I've adopted and that I find effective. And certainly the other question you raised on the chat, which I think is a great one, is when it's part of my caution too, in terms of procurement, government procurement. I think asking people to talk through how they've thought about standards, what standards they might have already adopted, is a better way rather than erecting barriers, because I like you, worry that sometimes when we get too prescriptive, and if you look at lighting, that's a classic case in point for smart cities, right? There is lots of innovation in lighting globally, in Europe, even in places like New Zealand, which is dedicated as a dedicated pool of money to smart lighting, which is really interesting from a government level. There's advances there where sometimes the standards lag, and then sometimes we're so prescriptive at a local government level around the standards we use that actually we need to think carefully, because maybe that's causing issues as well. And that's certainly something that people have shared with me. So I think a great question, and I think we can do that by avoiding being overly prescriptive. And I think we have to be really vigilant before we adopt standards to make sure, as you said, if we've got advances in Australia that are leading the world, they need to be reflected.
All right, we've got a question here from Simon Hunter, Jed, which you have touched on a little bit, but I might just ask Simon to come off mute in case we can flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah, Kelly, I think that might have just been the answer Jed was giving about not mandating, but rather giving the opportunity to not act as a barrier to startups. So I thought that was a good answer. Thank you.
Well done, Jed. You answered two questions in one go. All right. Well, if there's no more questions at the moment, hopefully there's a few people saving some more until the end. I will pass on to Chris for our third presentation. Are you good to go, Chris?
Yes, I am. So
right.
Thank you. And hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Not just yet, Chris.
Oh. Sorry about this.
There we go. That's the
Right.
screen. Just need
Thank
to
you.
jump to the presentation. Perfect.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Kelly and Mark, Adam and Jed. Much appreciated for this opportunity. As outlined with my introduction, I chair Standards Australia's Geographic Information Group, or IT4, which actually mirrors the International Technical Committee for Geospatial Information at ISO. So within Australia, we actually have got a mirror committee that's looking at the geospatial communities. And 25 years ago, that committee endorsed, basically, we will contribute to the international standards around geospatial information, and we will endorse all that for Australian and New Zealand standards. So all our technical input is done at the local level, but also then fed up into the international level. And quite a few of our international communities and Standards Australia's committees are mirroring that activities. So in recent times, Standards Australia, with its Smart Cities roadmap, outlined where should we put our energy around, and having some influences around some of the standards within the smart cities and smart places and so forth, and consequently now the digital twins. So Jed indicated around some of these activities, and we've got 3 main groups or 3 main committees that are looking at via Standards Australia's membership on smart cities, and that is 268 Sustainable Cities for Communities, which Adam alluded to quite a few of the standards that are supporting that activity. Then there is a joint ISO and IEC working group around smart cities for the ICT, and this was brought together in 2016, and their first meeting was in Singapore in the mid of the year of that year. So it's 5 years basically of doing that particular work. And then there is the IAC Smart Cities Systems Committee on Smart Cities, and looking at the electrotechnical aspects of a smart city. And then we've got a number of other standards bodies that are looking at smart cities. ITU on smart sustainable cities, IEEE on smart cities, and we've got a whole host of other community of standards development groups, like the Open Geospatial Consortium, are looking at assisting smart cities in for geospatial information like ISO TC 211. I just wanted to take this slide that Adam brought up and basically look at the technical standards side of this view. And we see in the orange around some of in the middle rows around information and data quality. So that's done at a information side of it, but from a geospatial side, we've also done data quality for geospatial information, but we also reference and take a link out of those standards to ensure there is interoperability between what the ICT environment is doing, but also in the geospatial side of doing it. So it's seamless, it's interoperable, and the fundamental understandings and ontologies and vocabularies are very similar. So when we get into the environment of having a machine-to-machine working, then these important facets around vocabularies and ontologies is really important. The pink one is around the building information modelling, and we've been doing some work starting to look at how do we integrate and link up with the BIM environment, the building and construction environment, with the geospatial environment. And that's a bit more challenging because the building communities and construction communities have developed their technical modelling that when you get down to the weeds of it, have done it a different way to the spatial side. So this is going to be the challenge when we get into the smart cities and sustainable communities, and how we're starting to integrate data, is we as communities have to now come together as groups and to figure out how do we improve this linking and integrating information from different communities that will be able to be used in a more holistic environment as we go forth. So that's just one area that is going to be challenged. You think it's challenging with your own vertical community of trying to sort things out, but when we get across the horizontal, like geospatial and building and transportation and health and so forth, that's going to be a bit more challenging. And I'd like to suggest to those communities and departments and governments to acknowledge and recognise that there is a role that you have to bring communities together other than their own to improve this interoperability of information across the sector. So supporting the smart city places strategy is now this collaboration connection. So we've got in our smart environments, we've got geospatial information about the land and so forth and where buildings sit and so forth, but we've got also transportation that we want to link up with. We've got health, and we're better understanding about the need of importance around health for our communities, the building construction, the telecommunications, and we're ramping up 5G, but if you talk to Ian Hopperman, he'll say there'll be 6G. They're already starting around 6G. And what does that mean for the communities and the telecommunications and therefore the smart cities, education? So they're the issues around themes, I suppose, that you would want to call it. But then you've got on the other side is that technical side is the Internet of Things, AI, the sensor and imagery. So the example about pollution and so forth is sensors with air quality. And we know that 18 months ago, we had a fairly severe, in the East Coast, a fair amount of pollution, and our air quality within Canberra at least, it was on a couple of days the worst air quality in the world. But we've got a number of now sensors that we need to start to link up more broadly within our environment. And then, Jed, as the blockchain is, we're starting to use blockchain quite significantly throughout our communities. And via what are we doing in the spatial environment is we're using blockchain for the land registries and property transactions and so forth. So that's how we've fed some of our work of geospatial into the blockchain environment, to saying, look, there is a use cases, and we're using a lot of these use cases now to assist in the various communities to better understand where we're coming from. So I'd like to go a bit more deeper into this geospatial and what we're doing in the spatial geospatial community around our standards of activities. So coordinate referencing, that's going to be really important now. So if you look at autonomous cars, indoor navigation and robotics, moving people efficiently through our smart cities, our coordinate referencing needs to be within now, not 1 or 2 metres, but within 1 or 2 centimetres. And Australia and New Zealand are really leading quite a lot of this effort within the communities to to improve the understanding not only within our geospatial community, but more broadly in our other communities like building, space and so forth. Another area is about addressing, and we would think that the address of a building or your residence would be fairly fundamentally understood by everyone. Well, I can tell you it's not. And there has been a number of examples where emergency management has gone to the wrong address because of a breakdown in procedures around allocating the appropriate standard for their applications. And Australia and New Zealand have their own addressing, and we've been feeding that information up to the international areas around more broadly what address needs to be or what it is for the community. Our address is also around rural addressing, and which we've been a pioneer around how to better address our rural environments. We're doing a lot of work around land property information and the land administration and so forth. And a lot of that work now is now going to be used by the World Bank and the UN's on around who owns property and so forth, which is fundamentally a driver for economies and so forth and taxation purposes. And some of the information that we're developing within that particular standard will be used worldwide, but also in the South Pacific regions and those countries there will be utilising. We're also updating our land use and land cover environments to support the SDGs in its work and so forth, and reporting back to the UN on how we're doing our work around land use and land cover. Sensor and imagery, and the integration of sensor and imagery, and also with the in very recent times within the Australian context around space, as we know that the Australian government has now put a lot of efforts into the space environment, and we'll be seeing quite a bit of activities around how space can assist in the smart cities and digital twins. And we're doing a lot of work with now in the smart cities and digital twins. And finally, we've now got a significant driver. We've had these significant drivers within governments at Australian government level and state government and jurisdictions about open data and so forth. But basically, last year with the COVID-19 and the data sharing and so forth, National Cabinet agreed that to create an intergovernment agreement to facilitate greater data sharing between all levels of government. And the standards will play a significant part of this. And if we fundamentally see that as what Adam says, this is the good, then these standards will assist in this process of improving the data sharing environments that we're having. Look, we're not going to it's not going to happen next week or the week after, but it's the process and the fundamentally process of putting forth some good procedures within your own jurisdictions to fundamentally saying, yes, the data sharing is going to be important. And the mindset It's not just going to be used for the spatial community with just in our own community, but where else is it going to be used, and how we're going to use it far more better and efficiently, not only for ourselves as a government's environment, but also for our citizens that want to have this integration. And this crowdsourcing environment that we're going to have is also not only about data sharing from a jurisdiction level, but also from our citizens that want to improve their information. So they'll be wanting to share some of their outcomes. So there's some of the policies around how to improve this engagement, two-way engagement, not only by the industries, but also for our citizens. So that's it for me, and hopefully that will help you with some of the standards world we live in. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation, Chris. That's fantastic. It's just great to see the complexity of all the moving parts in smart places, the number of different sectors weighing in. And the challenges are obvious if all these areas are not speaking the same language and following the same standards. And I think anyone involved in smart places or emergency response knows just how important spatial information is in particular. Every single one of these things has a location, and that location is usually critical to it working in the first place. You've given a clear message to government there, the importance of working across the sector, getting outside the government bubble and working across industry and different levels of government in the community. But I guess speaking about getting outside of the government bubble, I thought this might be a good opportunity to link to last week's masterclass on building community trust. Would you like to speak a little bit about what you think the role of standards might be in building community trust around smart places?
I think what happens within our world is that generally we're governed by legislation and standards ourselves. Every day when we get out of bed and do things, we're encompassed by legislation and standards that are assisting in efficiency of our life. And if we think about that as a context of ensuring that the standards are for us to improving our lives and in becoming more efficient in our work, then I think we would be in a better place. So I think what we need to think about is what are the standards are actually trying to achieve, but also how are we going to utilise that through our applications and apps and so forth, and that we're going to use this information in the future.
Thanks, Chris. We've got a question from Simon Hunter at DeepEye. Simon?
Yeah, Chris, I thought you made a really great case about the technical challenges around the level of detail and the accuracy of the location and spatial data. I guess my question is, how confident are you that we in Australia will rise to the challenge, and what do we in a policymaking environment need to be really focusing on?
Look, from some of the fundamental frameworks for spatial information around, say, coordinate referencing, I'll take that because I know that the Australian government is spending $250 million really to ensure our coordinate referencing and our datums for us as a platform for everything that's going to be tied down to a point on the Earth is going to be done efficiently as the best we can technically. Geoscience Australia and all the jurisdictions are working very closely through industry and also the applications like Trimble and all those groups of people and industries and companies that are understanding the full extent of the coordinate referencing and why we have to update it because of transportation and so forth. There are communities that have this authority around it, and I suppose that's a key aspect for us as a community. Who's got the authoritative data that we're relying on? When we know that governments have got that authoritative data, and we trust that as a community and a citizen, we trust the governments to have that. And I think that's an important aspect going forth, is to ensuring that quality and authoritative data that we're going to put out is a gold standard, a 5-star thing, as opposed to someone else that we think that's got 5 stars, but it isn't. We need to ensure that we have this confidence around of this type of data information that we're going to put out there.
Okay, I can see Simon typing a follow-up. Oh, great answer, 5 stars, thank you. Okay, thanks, Simon. We have another question from Sheridan Ware. Sheridan, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly. And thanks to all the panelists. These have been some really great presentations. And a question for all of you. I think in your presentation, Jed, you talked about ISO 27001, the standard on data security. Under the auspices of the Property Council of Australia, we have a number of CIOs that come together that represent the landlord community in the commercial landlord space. And what we find is in the enterprise IT environment, our supply chain's pretty good at really selling us their maturity against standards like ISO 27001. But perhaps that maturity is a little bit lagging in the OT or the operational technology space. So I just wanted to ask, really, does anyone have any advice for engaging with the supply chain around critical equipment, IoT and the like in the built form, and what role government might play in making sure that we're lifting maturity across the board in that supply chain?
I'm happy to jump in, Kelly, if that's okay with my other panelists, because I know Chris and Adam will have views as well. That's a fantastic question. My mind straight away goes to work that's underway now. You mentioned the critical sector, and when I go back to the LMV issue, the data breach we had a few years ago, that drove, and for people on the call, that was an issue where a contractor, essentially put information on the dark web, and it had massive implications. And I know banks, as a result, did things like looked at their supply chains and said, if you wanted to work with us in the valuation space, you need to meet these standards. Otherwise, that's an issue for us as a business. And that was, I think, some of the behaviour that you were talking about in that great question. In terms of guidance, there's some really good open source stuff that comes out of the United States. So particularly the intelligence, the national security community, they've got some really good playbooks, fact sheets, I think that are starting points for some of those questions you might ask. And that's relevant to everyone, whether you work in government or indeed in the private sector. I also know the ACS out of Home Affairs, and that's the Australian Cyber Security Centre, are developing resources in that space. So they've got a series of supply chain principles which people can pick up and kind of work through. And those are modelled on work that was done in the United Kingdom. So those are open source documents that people on this call can actually Google and find quite easily. I think the challenge for the supply chains, as you mentioned, and particularly around OT, and even obtaining that information from people who might be partners and providers, that's an enduring challenge. So I think that's a piece that government federally is trying to work through. I would also say, though, that in a lot of these areas that are deemed critical infrastructure, and the definition's about to broaden to include data, to include even retail and groceries, and I'm not sure how that impacts the property industry specifically, but that will have touch points. And they're about to articulate a set of rules, the federal government, under legislation, if that gets up, that would govern essentially, data security, information security more broadly. You're also right to raise the question about protective security. So there's one thing I'd leave you with to Google when we walk out of this session. It's the unspoken stuff. We've spoken a lot today about technical standards around security, but it's always people who are the weakest link, as you rightly pointed out. And so I think that, again, there's some really good resources that the ACSC put out, which are a starting point. I think the private sector also needs to do a lot more work based on work that's been done in the UK, in New Zealand, and in the US, in Australia, on actually how we open source some of that information. In other words, how you can point people to one set of resources, because much like the answer I've given you now, there's lots of things I can point you to, and they're all real, they're all live, and you can find them. But I think I acknowledge what you're saying. There's no one source of truth. There's no one standard that meets those needs. So maybe that's a gap. And certainly happy to talk about that too.
Yeah, thanks, Jed, because I think that's kind of the problem, right, is that in the IT space, I think everyone's always been very cognizant of standards, but when you're dealing with lift suppliers or critical plant equipment, for example, that's not their core business. It's not always been their focus. And I think the critical infrastructure bill perhaps is a wonderful catalyst that we have for building standards and the maturity against those standards across the board. Can I also, I'm sorry to steal all this space, but I'd really just love to ask you, Chris, what you see as the opportunities in the commercial places space on blockchain, because it's just a bit of a passion of mine.
Look, I don't know, to be frank, I don't know much about the blockchain environment as such, except the land properties or the spatial community has basically provided use cases for blockchain. I know the Australian government, and Jed touched on this, the Australian government has funded the activities around blockchain via Standards Australia as a chair and secretariat work. So they, you may want to talk to Jen, may be a better link up with the blockchain environment that we've got within Australia, because I'm only one type of user. Sorry.
I'm mindful we wanted to get back to Adam as well on that question that Sheridan raised, but I'm happy to talk offline too. Of course, in the standards world, one of the things they do with every new set of standards is get use cases together. So in areas like blockchain and AI, what you'll find is there's a whole treasure trove of real live use cases hidden behind that wall, if you will. So happy to chat offline about that, because I think that's the question that always comes up.
Fabulous, thank you.
Adam, did you have anything you wanted to pop in there in response to that original question from Sheridan?
I think everyone else touched on it well. The only thing I would add to it is being around the green building sort of, agenda for the last 20 years. I've found, and particularly property, we move in 10-year chunks of change. It takes 2 years to write the new thing that we want to change, takes a couple of years for the leaders to give it a go. Everyone else stands back and watches. Then when they realize it won't burn them, they jump on board, and kind of you build the momentum, permeate the supply chain, things like that. So I've found that we generally kind of transform in 10-year chunks. So nothing more too scientific than we just got to keep plugging away at it. Sorry.
And it's a wonderful analogy, actually, because I think the PCA cybersecurity group was a direct successor to the sustainability group that the PCA also set up.
Exactly.
We realised the value of collaboration. So,
exactly, yeah.
All right, look, if there's no other questions coming from the audience, I've got one that I'd like to put to all of the speakers. And it's really about what is the level of influence that New South Wales and or Australia has had to date on the development of the standards that apply in the smart places space. versus how that's developing elsewhere in the world? Who's kind of leading this work at the moment? And how do you see that role evolving as we, start on our exciting journey that we're talking about today? Starting with you, Chris. You look keen.
I'll start because I'll use my experience within ISO, and Adam and Jed will have maybe a different tack. But so within ISO and IEC work, which are the three that I had highlighted at the top, we've been late coming to the table in ISO's 268. We've had some input into Working Group 11, the Smart Cities ICT, and we've got some work within IC's systems for smart cities. But generally, it's been slow in getting groups of people, governments of all persuasions, to allocate some resources for inputting into our requirements for these international standards. And as we've outlined, what these international standards are published generally become through to a standard for Australia and New Zealand sort of thing. If we don't have our flavour or our requirements up front, then we're going to get what the rest of the world wants in a smart cities standards environment. And a lot of it is a European-based, a North Asia-based, and an American-based. Very little is from the Southern Hemisphere based, and also based on resources, human resources. So in Australia's context, we haven't got a lot of people to doing a lot of this work. We have to use our systems and our technology a lot smarter to doing. If a job does take 10 people, we only may have half a person to doing it. So we have to utilise this technology a greater efficiency. If we don't build that in to some of this ICT work, then we're going to fail in delivering the requirements that we expect, our efficiency requirements that we're expecting out of it. So I do challenge those people on the call that have got some influencing around putting resources for our contributions to our smart cities / digital twin now in the future. They'll be gratefully accepted, because we're very thin on the ground really on our contributions and so forth. We're getting better at it, and we're understanding those issues, because jurisdictions like New South Wales, like Queensland and Victoria and others have got now significant drivers of putting information to the cities to improving our integration of the technology within that space. I'll leave it there.
Adam or Jed, did you want to jump in?
Oh, Chris nailed it. So I won't add any more to it.
Yeah, ditto from me. That was a fantastic answer. Thank you.
All right, we're at risk of finishing early here, so I'm conscious that everyone in the call should get some value out of the time that they've sort of chosen to show up for. I guess one more question that I can put out there is, Chris, you mentioned.
Yeah, sorry, I'd like to also say to everyone on the call that we do, give us use cases. If for the standards development, use cases are now fantastic to understand some of those issues that we're trying to deliver. And when we get into a standards development group with number of nations there, if we can provide a use case and give them a narrative of what we're trying to to overcome with, that's far better than trying to explain technically. So it's about a story that we're trying to do, and we're getting better at it. And I also would invite jurisdictions and governments and even companies and whatever to give use cases to what they want, what we want to solve within our standards development, because what we would like to do in Australia is completely maybe different ways of doing it that we're doing within Europe or China, in actual fact. And if you look at why there is a lot of work that the Chinese are doing, is there was a report a couple of years ago, they're moving 500 million people from rural to urban. And they're going to build all these cities to support that transition. But fundamentally, they're moving their populations from a sustaining, just a rural farming substantial economy to a more industrialized economies of an urban environment where the growth, where the basically where the wealth is in cities and so forth. So please, you get the use cases, send them to the various committees that Centres Australia and others have, because it is important for us to then bring to the table when we go to these meetings.
All right, we've got a quick comment there from James Sankar. James, did you want to briefly introduce yourself and just speak to that?
G'day, it's James. I don't know if you can see me. It's getting dark around here. Yeah, just wanted to say hello and echo everything that's been said, especially a lot from Chris there around standards. I chair the IEC Smart City Systems Group TC IT 269. Got that right, Chris?
Yes.
Likewise, we do a lot of work in the electrotechnical system side of smart cities, and echo the sentiments that we'd obviously like to see more participation there to help as that work starts to ramp up. Kelly, is that okay, or would you like some more?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Just wanted to give you the opportunity.
Thank you.
It's never fun when we're just a pair of initials in a chat, so that's better than nothing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I've got one last question for the panel. Given the sort of renewed focus from the National Cabinet on data sharing coming out of COVID, what would you say the implications are likely to be, if you could pull out your crystal ball, for state and local governments and industry practitioners in the near future?
I'll start. Sorry, Adam.
Yeah.
I would say for some of the departments and jurisdictions to have a look at their back-end databasing and really look at if the existing, that side of your database collection and so forth, can that be upscaled in the future for the next 10 years? If it can't, then you may have to relook at redesigning your back end so you can get your data out there more efficiently. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Chris. Adam?
I think my crude post-mortem of COVID and data sharing, or lack of, or forced data sharing, more than anything highlights that this is a people issue and a culture issue, and we can have bills and guidelines and standards and anything that we want there, but I am finding that this one's really about people. People are very protective about their data. We value it in different ways. So I think this is going to be a long, tough road, and we need to start. But it's people are complex beasts, so it's going to take a lot of hard work. Yeah, but a lot of good case studies as well that have come out globally. Examples. So again, if we're willing to learn from others, we may accelerate the process.
And probably +1 for me on that note. The other thing I would say is we need to stop just talking about privacy impact assessments, and we need to actually talk about risk assessment more broadly. So it gets to the point Adam made, where we already have good standards and we don't actually need government coming in and regulating too. It is one of the dangers in mandating things proactively that actually poses risk to state governments, local governments too. So it's something to be careful of. I know that will happen through national structures and intergovernmental structures, which is important because we've done a lot of things right in New South Wales and we have the right frameworks in place. So we wouldn't want anything tinkering with what we're doing really well at a state level. That's important. So I think my message for both the private sector and for public is think about things more broadly. We're moving beyond a world where we just think about privacy through the risk of controls or technical solutions. We need to do proper risk assessment, which is not new in the private sector, but as Adam said, that gets us thinking about the human factor. What have we thought about that might not be in a narrow privacy assessment because we're so obsessed about that, and that's the topic of the day. And I think that's the one takeaway I would leave with everyone, is that if you do that well, you cover off privacy, you cover off the human factor, you cover off security, you cover off all your natural hazards, and you've done your smart places planning really well, rather than going down a rabbit hole where you might miss some fundamental things.
Really important message there. Thank you, Jed. All right. Well, look, I might just wrap up. I think what I'm taking from all of this is that we're at the start of a decades-long journey where everybody on this call is going to play a role in the adoption and refinement of standards relating to smart places as we work towards a more sort of consistent, integrated, interoperable world. You know, we've heard the importance of standards for international businesses doing business here, for attracting that work to the economy, for our citizens having access to those services that we love to pick up as early adopters, whether it's shared platforms or the latest smartphone. We need to learn to love standards. We need to not be intimidated. Start small and scale up. Pick them up, give them a go, road test, give that feedback, become part of the system so that we're driving that international change. And be champions, embedding contracts, and that there's a clear sort of role for government in providing a safe space to experiment, as well as working on addressing standards more generally rather than mandating their use and getting locked into a box. So hopefully this session sort of achieved its goal of demystifying standards and explaining the whole process for everyone who's in attendance. So I guess let's all get busy writing history and build something that's got uptake as high as the Green Star building rating system. Just to wrap up, links will be posted in the chat. If they links have been posted in the chat for the presentation slides that you've seen today. A recording of this video, which won't be available for another couple of days yet, but will be up on the ACS Masterclass YouTube channel, and a link to register for the next Masterclass next week, which focuses on digital twins. So we've got Adam Molam, Tim Mumford and Marie Truelove speaking at that Masterclass, and then another 7 exciting ones to follow after that. So hope to see you all again sometime in the next couple of months. And with that, thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, our speakers.
See you, everyone.